clear a person's head. This is according to Daniel Jones, who led the research for the Senate investigation. No medical personnel or CIA officers were ever held accountable for these actions.
CIA hired two psychologists who devised all these medieval tortures, or I should say refined them. This stuff's been around for years. These guys were lauded in the media once their contracts with the CIA were over and they were able to discuss it. But they all should have been prosecuted, and of course, none was.
The article goes on to say, the testimony was the most detailed public account of the procedure from a medical perspective. In October 2021, the since-released prisoner, Majid Khan, told his sentencing jury that the CIA agents used, quote, green garden hoses connected to a faucet to force water inside his rectum. He described his description of what the CIA did to him so troubled a military jury that they urged the Pentagon to grant Mr. Khan clemency.
Which the court did. So he pleaded guilty to the crime of, I don't know why these guys are being charged in Cuba. These are regular federal crimes. He delivered money to a bomber who exploded a hotel in Jakarta, Indonesia, at which Americans were killed. But in the Bush regime, tinkered with by our friend Senator Lindsey Graham, somehow that's a military crime and they're tried before a military tribunal in Cuba. Anyway, he pleaded guilty to delivery of this money to the guy who made the bomb in Jakarta. And the court let him go because of what the CIA had done to him all the years he was kept in captivity in Cuba, and the recommendation of 7 of the 8 jurors in that case. See, Bush believed that military men wouldn't hesitate to convict somebody who confessed under torture and wouldn't be cringed by the torture. Maybe that's the way George W. Bush himself thinks. But that was a bizarre stereotype of military men who turned out to be far more sensitive, far more faithful to the Constitution, far more understanding of human rights than the President of the United States was.
This is very, very sad. It's so sad what's happened to this country. And again, the coverage of the media of the Ukraine war, they never did this with America's Iraq war. They never did it with the Afghan war. And there's a primary reason why. Because you remember, you couldn't go there as a journalist. You had to be embedded with the military. You're in bed with them, in other words. There were no free journalists like the Vietnam War. You had to be part of the military, and they tell you what to write when you wanted to write it or show what you wanted to show. The hypocrisy of the media in this coverage is disgusting. Day after day after day, talking about the Russian war crimes while ignoring America's massive war crimes that have cost us trillions and they've killed millions.
And the media has ignored the peace movement in the United States. As you and I were discussing before we came on air, the vast disparity between the anti-war rally in Berlin and the anti-war rally at which you were one of the featured speakers in Washington, D.C. The numbers were radically different, and the press coverage, well, you can't say the press coverage was different. There was no press coverage in the United States, and it was the front page of the Financial Times and the major European newspapers, the rally in Berlin.
Well, there was coverage that was made fun of by Rachel Maddow.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah. There were Proud Boys there, and you saw them, the same people that were, she goes on, that were in Charlotte, North Carolina, or whatever, South Carolina, when 2 years ago you could recognize their faces. I'm going to recognize the face of somebody 2 years ago and something I know nothing about. Oh, and it was wild and it was pro-Russian. That was the propaganda. What a disgusting human being. You know, a quick story. I used to be on Tucker Carlson when he was at MSNBC years ago. and where he was in Sea Caucus, and you being a Jersey guy, you remember Sea Caucus. That's
Oh
where
yeah,
that was.
I remember those old studios. It was a former Ralph Lauren showroom that NBC turned into a studio. I was there many times
Yeah.
before my career at Fox.
So I'm sitting outside, I'm going on the air, and I'm hearing this woman going on and on and on, and she leaves. Tucker, I said to Tucker Carlson, I said, "Who was that?" I said, "She's insufferable." This is going back into like the mid 2000s. He said, "Oh, her name is Rachel Maddow, and they're grooming her."
Wow.
Yeah, that Rachel Maddow, that arrogant little nothing. And going back to there's peace is prohibited in America. And as the cover of the Trends Journal this week really tells the story, and that is, what side are you on? It's as simple as that. Do you support satanic war or godly peace? End of story.
I mean, Americans don't want to, that's the question of the age. And
Yeah.
Americans don't want to be forced to answer that, but they soon will, as more and more Americans are involved. And as soon as a few start coming home in body bags, or as soon as members of the Congress start to recognize the Constitution and the treaties that we signed, there's no declaration of war. There can be no declaration of war against Russia because it doesn't pose a military threat to us. Then what the hell are we doing there?
Yeah.
But right now, Republicans and Democrats are the big government and the big war party.
Yeah, where's big mouth Bernie Sanders? Oh, he voted for that $40 billion to go to Ukraine. I forgot.
Yes.
Oh, and Elizabeth Warren. Oh,
yes.
and AOC. And how about FUC? Yeah. What a bunch of little lowlives. And where there are only a few people in both parties that are coming out against the war, and where are the rest of them? And why aren't they pushing for peace and more rallies for peace? You can't just have a rally one day and call it a day. And by the way, when they had the rally in Berlin, the Schultz, the chancellor over there, denounced it. And all the major media denounced it. And they called it a niche protest before it was happening. And it made it sound bad. And this is what they're doing. It's very important. Once upon a time, there was a thing called the Battle of Seattle. Do you remember that?
Basically, yeah.
What happened was in Seattle, back in 1999, Clinton was bringing China into the World Trade Organization. And the people knew that if China came into the World Trade Organization, all our jobs would be leaving and manufacturing would be going to China. So some 45,000 people took to the streets because they were having a protest. They were having a World Trade Organization meeting in Seattle to protest this. So what they did, they had the agents provocateurs, these guys dressed in black in perfect shape, burning a car, smashing windows. That was the news. Forget about the demonstrations. So now, rather than having agents provocateurs, what they're doing is they're saying, as they did here with that lousy lowlife Rachel Maddow, and I'll call her that to a face, to tell me what was going on there when I was a speaker, and it wasn't a pro-Russian rally. What they're doing now is they're saying the Proud Boys were there, the ultra-right. They did the same thing in Europe. They said the right wing was there. So what they're trying to do now is saying if these groups are there protesting a war and they're right wing, they're no good. So that's what they're doing to demean the peace protests. This is very important.
The only advantage that comes from Schultz and the media condemning it is that it gives it exposure, and it lets thinking Germans realize that there are, and other Europeans, there are people out there willing to say out loud and publicly what I'm thinking. But in this country where it gets no coverage at all, I mean, your speech was fabulous. Ron Paul's speech was fabulous. I don't know how many people saw it, but it should have merited coverage in the major newspapers. It's a head scratcher. You know, you and I are about the same age, and we remember the Vietnam War when the media was fiercely against it. Now, maybe, as you say, the difference is because of the draft.
That's it.
But you would think that the media, which consists basically of left-wing people, but educated people, would know not to mouth what the government and the CIA are feeding them, that there's another side to the story, just like this stuff with torture and Bush. I remember being excoriated at my former employer when I mentioned this stuff on air. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody wanted to hear it. Lindsey Graham was a hero, an American patriot who knew what the law was and who knew how far the government could go to extract truth from people. Baloney. This is all coming back to explode in their faces. The evidence of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed being the mastermind of 9/11 is overwhelming. They're afraid to put him on trial because once he goes on trial, he can tell everything that happened to him, and he can put before the jury all the American imperialistic behavior in the Middle East, starting in the Eisenhower administration, which motivated them to do what they did. That's the last thing the government wants. They can't defend against that.
No, only America is allowed to kill. Same thing in Israel, what's going on. Look what they're doing to the Palestinians.
They're slaughtering them.
Yeah. No, but how dare you say that? You're an anti-Semite. They could kill anybody that they want. They could send missiles into Iran. They could bomb Syria, just like America. America could do anything. They could kill anybody. You want to go to Somalia? How about that? Anywhere they want, anytime, that's fine. But those dirty Russians. And again, the people have no clue why this
Now, why isn't someone on the floor of the Congress, the House or the Senate, saying what you just said?
Because
in the Vietnam War, there was Wayne Morse from Oregon and William Fulbright from Arkansas, and they made those arguments every day. And even though they didn't change LBJ's mind, they had his feet to the fire. I'll tell you what changed LBJ's mind was the anti-war movement. They made him afraid to run for re-election in 1968. Okay, we ended up with Nixon, but it showed that you can affect the policy of the government when that match of liberty is struck, and a small but determined minority realize that our freedom is being taken away from us, our assets are being taken away from us, life is being taken away from us, our boys are being used to slaughter their boys to no legitimate, legal, moral end.
And as I said, everyone, this is why we have Judge Napolitano on. Nobody says what he says with the judicial authority and knowledge. And a man that I would love to see be president of the United States. Judge, thanks so much for being on, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Gerald. All the best.